Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. I'm Karen McCarthy. In this edition, all eyes on Mecca, the halal meat market, a multi-million-dollar industry for New Zealand meat processors and one with heaps more potential. We look at how New Zealand came to be a world leader in halal meat exports and the trailblazers who've tapped into this lucrative trade. Plus find out all about the huge potential still out there in the global halal economy for meat and so much more. My guests this week from Hamilton, the Managing Director of Waikato-based Greenlee Meats, Tony Egan, and from the Meat Industry Association in Wellington, their Trade and Economic Manager, Dan Coup. Thanks for being with us. In New Zealand, we've got a relatively small Muslim population. We see few retail butchers in the main streets, maybe aside from parts of Auckland advertising halal meat. So New Zealanders may not appreciate the significance and the size of the global business for this. Tell us about it. How big a business is halal for New Zealand meat producers?
Well, Karen, right on our doorstep there is a very big Muslim population. Of the global population of Muslim people, about 1.6 billion, about 1 billion of those people live in the Asia region. And so there's a big opportunity for New Zealand to focus on them as a customer group. And if you look at the evolution of the meat industry in New Zealand, you can see it's transitioned from frozen carcasses to chilled cuts, and from products that have been very singular in focus, if you like, a wide range of differentiated products. And so it's a natural extension of that understanding to look closer to home and to look at new and emerging markets. And over the last 20 years or so, a range of companies in New Zealand, including the one I come from, Greenlee Meats, have really looked in at what halal processing is all about and what the requirements those customers have.
Dan, you don't have to look back, I guess, that far when you know most of our meat, as Tony mentions, was probably lamb and beef chucked in the back of frozen containers on ships bound for Europe. Things have changed a lot, haven't they?
That's right, Karen. I mean, there's been a steady progression of the meat industry over the years, since the times when we were entirely dependent on Europe, particularly for sheep meat, and the US for beef. We're now heavily diversified away from those traditional markets, and halal is an important part of that diversification. As Tony said, those markets are really close to home and they're where we should be looking. The other important thing is that those halal markets, particularly in Southeast Asia, coincide with the really rapidly developing world and countries where populations are growing, and also the middle class is growing. So those people that can newly afford our products are right there on our doorstep, and we need to focus on them.
Apart from the size of the halal market, how hungry are they for our product, for New Zealand product?
Well, it happens that a lot of those emerging economies are also becoming increasingly interested in higher value products, and New Zealand specialises in the quality end of the market often. So we're able to tap into that emerging economic growth, and halal is simply a process, if you like, that is followed in the slaughter of livestock, and by adhering to that, we open up that market for New Zealand.
Exactly what is halal? People have probably got a perception of what it is and what it means, but can you explain for us, you know, exactly what is it and what is the practice that you have to adhere to in order to sell this overseas?
Well, in New Zealand, we have I believe, blazed a trail in terms of marrying up animal welfare, worker safety and religious compliance. And what we've done is introduced electrical stunning over the last 15 or so years, and that electrical stunning has enabled us to desensitise the animal to pain and to have them presented safely to a Muslim slaughterman to do the appropriate halal cut, and then follows segregation of product if necessary, then follows an audit trail, a certification regime, and evidence to the customers in the market, if you like, that we are complying with their religious requirements. Having said that, we've also got at an industry level an understanding between our Ministry of Primary Industries now and countries like Malaysia, an understanding more broadly of what halal means and what protocols are required in New Zealand. So it's given us a very high level of integrity in the process as well.
Dan, is this all about, I guess, adding to New Zealand's reputation as a source of good, clean, safe food, just in general terms, isn't it? That's certainly something...
Absolutely, that's how I'd characterise it, Karen. In developed or traditional markets, people think of high quality food as being first of all good to eat, but then there's some secondary issues around animal welfare, ethical considerations, even environmental considerations. Those secondary things to a Muslim consumer are really wrapped up in the word halal, so that means a good quality product that's dealt with all of their ethical concerns effectively. So this is no different to the way that the New Zealand industry has to look after its discerning customers in any other market. This is just the way that Muslim customers sort of express their discerningness.
It's about so much more than religious requirements, I guess, because that's certainly what people think. The slaughterman has to, I don't know, how does it work? They have to face Mecca? What's the story there?
Yes, they do, and we provide things like a prayer room for the slaughterman as well. Keep in mind, New Zealand has been doing this for some time, and there are quite a number of halal slaughtermen in our meat plants. In fact, more than 80%, I would say, of New Zealand meat plants are currently halal certified. Earlier this year, I represented the industry here in New Zealand at a conference in Malaysia called the World Halal Summit, and basically that conference was about Muslim countries from quite a number of regions and around the world, probably as many as 30 countries, coming together and talking about the halal requirements and the evolution of their understanding of halal. What I was able to do on behalf of the New Zealand industry was present a paper which described how we had adapted, with electrical stunning principally, adapted to their requirement, animal welfare requirements and the worker safety requirements. And I'd have to say there seemed to be a general feeling of acceptance within that conference that New Zealand was taking a very good approach. If you like, some of them were saying we're the sort of the most understanding non-Muslim country in the world in some respects, because we've taken a very pragmatic but also a very considered approach to their requirements.
Is that the feedback the associations had, that New Zealand is up there?
Well, I think we have had positive feedback, but one important point that Tony made is that we seem to be blazing a trail amongst non-Muslim countries. So in Muslim countries, the production of halal product is taken for granted. So there's an expectation that the product is good. There's much higher level of questioning and scrutiny around production in non-Muslim countries, and I think New Zealand has worked really hard, the industry and also our officials have worked hard to give those Muslim consumers some confidence in the production here in New Zealand, which as a non-Muslim country. So
I'd add to that and say we've also got New Zealand Qualification Authority standards now that halal slaughtermen can apply to, and so they can gain broader understanding, not just in terms of Sharia law, but also in terms of hygiene, in terms of animal welfare, worker safety, knife sharpening. You know, there's practical aspects to this as well. And what that's doing is giving a very consistent approach across the whole industry. And so people who look at halal and have had traditional reservations about what it might all mean can now see that it's very easily understood, and it's achieving some very good goals for the industry overall.
So we've got something like a gold standard, or as you say, so a sort of set protocol, or a standard that is met, or that certain meat processors are certified with this standard.
So we actually have a regulated halal standard for New Zealand now. So part of the evolution of this over the last couple of years has been government stepping into the control of halal production alongside industry, so basically at industry's request to standardise what halal production in New Zealand actually means. And that standard actually allows our officials to negotiate directly with overseas religious authorities who may be part of government in Muslim countries, and actually negotiate what the New Zealand standard is, and that meets their requirements for halal production.
Is it important for those Muslim countries too? They place a lot of stock in having some sort of government input. They're having that kind of government standard regulation.
Absolutely, and it's fair to say that there are still a number of Muslim countries who are still questioning and probing and trying to understand the various requirements, and it's important, I think, that we help assist that by achieving a consistent approach.
Thanks, gentlemen. Coming up, just how did a family-run Hamilton Meatworks establish itself as a world leader in the halal meat market? More after the break. Stay with us on Straight Talk. I'm Karen McCarthy and you're back with Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow, and our guests Dan Coup and Tony Egan talking halal meat. What are some of our big markets?
Well, there are a range of halal markets. Indonesia and Malaysia are obviously big Southeast Asian markets, and particularly for meat companies like Greenlee Meats. If you look at our standard production, let's say 10 years ago, a lot of it was orientated towards the United States, and a lot of it was orientated towards grinding type products.
Hamburgers,
that sort of thing. Now, if you look at where we are today, we save up to 198 products in any given week, and 50% of those products have been sold to halal markets in the last year, and about 30 of those products are saved specifically for halal markets. So what the halal markets have done is given us the ability to take products that would have otherwise gone to lower value manufacturing type purposes and to turn them into added value cuts for markets that have a particular requirement.
What kind of products? What are you talking about?
Well, there are bone-in products, such as neck bones, for instance, or rib-type products. There are products that come from our manufacturing cow and bull, if you like, the dairy industry, cow and bull type products. They have a real niche in some of the Muslim markets. There are offal products. There are products that are at the higher end as well from our premium steers. So there's no one specific example, but a range of cuts across the whole spectrum.
And Dan, getting into this value-added cuts, I suppose, is crucial because that's where you make your money. It's not all about hamburger patties, as Tony says.
Well, that's right. But, I mean, that's what the New Zealand meat industry is these days, is a disassembly business to take carcasses and disassemble them and find the highest returning market for each individual part of that carcass. And as what Tony's saying is that a lot of the highest returning markets for certain cuts are in those Muslim markets, which is why we need to focus on the halal certification. And
I'd argue that the fact that, you know, we've had a higher New Zealand dollar for some years now, the fact that we've managed to maintain competitive returns, particularly on the beef side of the industry, is partly because of that emergence of the halal market. It's helped to add that extra 10, 15, 20% at times to the products we're producing. And it's also given us alternatives, so we're not heavily reliant on our traditional quota markets. It means we're able to be more creative and more customer specific in the products we're producing.
What are some of the other markets that are there to be tapped into? And especially, I guess, in the Asia-Pacific region, because there's a lot of countries in our backyard, I suppose, that have a Muslim population.
Just going a bit more broadly, Karen, I mean, where halal exports began for New Zealand is in the 1970s to the Middle East, and initially to Iran. Iran isn't a market for us at the moment, but there are still a lot of sheep meat products particularly that go into the Gulf states, so Saudi Arabia is probably the largest halal market for us still. But that's a sheep meat market in the main, so unlike what Tony's talking about in beef. But the key markets in Southeast Asia are going to be Indonesia and Malaysia, so we don't need to look too much further afield than those two countries. But the growth in those markets, where you've got a growing population and growing wealth of the middle class, is just phenomenal, and the opportunities are huge if we can tap them.
Has Greenlee already got business with those two nations?
Yes, we do, and we have a growing business with countries which you wouldn't normally say were Muslim countries. You know, there's countries like Singapore, or there's parts of Europe, countries like France, countries like China, or even the United States, who have large segments of their population that have Muslim interest. And so even within traditionally non-Muslim countries, there are opportunities for us to explore.
Greenlee was a trailblazer, I guess, 10, 15 years ago. What was it, or who was it, that first opened your eyes to this potential?
Well, I think a lot of the credit for that goes to the research that's been done in New Zealand, companies like Agri, and I think an understanding, you know, it's the New Zealand number 8 wire mentality to some degree, understanding that if you're not able to approach something one way, then there must be another way that can satisfy all concerned. And what New Zealand did was move away from the more old-fashioned ways of slaughter and look at the whole process again and see whether we could adapt it to basically meet the requirements of a halal or Muslim customer, but at the same time maintain our high standards for animal welfare and also worker safety.
Was there something wrong, Dan, with our old methods of slaughter? I mean, what's changed there? And obviously it must be a change for the better.
The key issue that Tony's driving at is being able to meet the halal requirement that the animal be alive at the time a halal cut is applied, whilst also meeting our animal welfare obligations to ensure that the animal was unconscious at the time of slaughter.
And I don't think you need to be a Muslim to particularly take that point of view either, because the consequence of the process is the animal has been well bled, and that leads to better meat quality as well. So there is a wholesomeness or quality aspect to this as well.
And you mentioned worker safety too before. That's an important element of this method of slaughter.
Well, certainly when you have large animals, and if they're not stunned, they can thrash around, and if they do that, then everyone's at risk. With the animal being desensitised to pain, effectively stunned, they are in a much more stable state. They're obviously unconscious, and so providing the Muslim slaughterman moves quickly into their work, it's a very safe process.
What did farmers think of this when you, I mean, do they care where their animals go once they, head off to the works? I mean, is this something they would have had input into?
I think a lot of farmers are interested in the welfare of their stock, whether it's calves, whether it's sheep or whether it's beef. They have put a lot of effort into growing those animals, and they're not just looking for economic returns, they're also looking for New Zealand's brand to be enhanced, markets to be evolved, and animal welfare to be maintained right through the process. It's all part of best practice, if you like, in modern farming and processing these days. Our responsibility as a processor is to demonstrate to them that not only are we professional in the dealings we have with them in buying their stock, we're also handling the whole transaction right through the market in a very professional way.
I think farmers also want to see that their processor exporter has a long-term and well thought through strategy in terms of their marketing. So having the foresight to be able to deal in these new developing countries that are going to be the markets of the future, I think gives them confidence in a particular processor exporter as well.
And what's happened to our traditional markets, Europe, North America? I mean, are they closing down, or are they still as healthy as they ever were?
Critically important, but the fact is that their share of the product out of New Zealand has been declining steadily over the decades, but Europe is still by far the most important market for sheep meat, and the US is still by far the most important market for beef, but their share has been declining. Yeah. Did
Greenlee realise the potential, the tremendous possibilities there 10, 15 years ago when you first went into this market? Did you realise how big and lucrative it was going to be?
That's a good question, because when you first look at Muslim markets, it's very easy to say there's a lot of people, so by implication they must want to eat a lot of meat. In actual fact, there are a lot of hurdles to get through. Some of them are basic market access requirements, which the Government of New Zealand's helped us with. Some of them are religious requirements, such as the halal. Some of them are then finding specific products that will satisfy a specific customer's needs. And I think what New Zealand industry overall has been good at doing in the last decade or so is focusing on the various levels of access and trying to make sure that we can adapt and modify our approach for each country to satisfy their particular requirements. And I think New Zealand has been good and successful at that, and I think there are a number of accredited certifying organisations in New Zealand which have had Muslim people representing them to certify the certificates we send with our product. Should take a lot of credit for that as well. They have put a lot of work into ensuring that the New Zealand story is understood and that our position in the market is well accepted by some of these countries, to the point now where I think New Zealand is seen as having not just a clean green image, but also a very good approach to the processing of stock.
With 1/4 of the world's population Muslim, what other opportunities exist in the halal economy for meat and beyond the dinner table? See you for more after the break. Welcome back to Straight Talk with our guests Stan Coup and Tony Egan. Tony, you want to say something about food safety and I guess that halal isn't just for Muslim customers. This is something that should appeal to all consumers of meat.
Yes, Karen, I think it's partly the New Zealand story. There's been a big focus on halal as a particular point in a process, but in actual fact, halal has a wholesomeness aspect to it as well. Halal means permissible, but the The whole approach of halal, if you like, or the intent of halal is also about wholesomeness and food that's good for you, which is no different in any culture or any language. So what New Zealand is able to do, I think, is tap into that desire for certainty. You know, not a day would go by when you don't see some food scare or some concern raised in the supply chain somewhere in the world. And New Zealand has become very proficient over the last 100 years or so in supply chain integrity. So I think we're able to add to the halal story and add New Zealand's food safety record, add the processes we have in place, add the integrity we have as a small country, and package that up to make customers in the Muslim countries particularly see New Zealand as a unique proposition.
We do have a great reputation, don't we, for safe, clean, green food, and this is just building on that, Dan?
I think so. I think the halal integrity really means that safety and wholesomeness to Muslim consumers in the same way as our sort of brand of clean and green and safe works in other non-Muslim countries here.
But it hasn't all been plain sailing, as we know. There was some issues a few years ago with Malaysia. I think there have been stumbles along the way. This is an ongoing kind of struggle, is it, or challenge?
That's right. Well, I mean, it's fair to say that developing trade into developing countries as a general rule is not plain sailing. There are always going to be hurdles around getting your product into the market at low cost without tariffs and without non-tariff barriers. In the past, halal integrity has been used has been cited as a reason not to accept New Zealand product into markets. We hope that the systems we've developed with government over the last couple of years will remove halal from one of the possible barriers.
But we seem for the most part to be getting it right.
Well, I think it's a cliche, but the world is getting smaller. The communication people, particularly younger people, are much more informed than they were and are much more interested in the products they're eating and where they come from. So I see New Zealand as being able to tap into that, and I think companies like my own, Greenlee Meats, can significantly increase our opportunities in these markets if we focus on those consumers and sell the New Zealand story in a credible way.
Now, I know you were at a conference in Auckland last month, the Asia Dialogue Conference, where they were talking about food being only a part of the potential that we could tap into in the global halal economy. What is there beyond meat?
Well, there are a whole range of things, and essentially what it taps into is an emerging economic power as opposed to something that's specifically just halal. I think it's understanding countries like Kazakhstan, which New Zealand's had very little to do with, partly because it's a little further away, but big Muslim population, and maybe meat's one way of opening the door there, but there are other services, whether it's in the mineral industry or whether it's in the finance services industry or training and development, teaching, tourism. There's a whole host of industries that with a coordinated focus on these emerging economies can do very well.
And Dan, is this something the industry can do on its own, or it needs to be that joint government industry initiative collaboration?
Well, I mean, I think our industry is probably, we're absolutely collaborating with government and seeking their assistance in our exports of our product. But to go more broadly than meat, it's going to need other industries to get involved in as well. So I think the meat industry has a particular focus on halal because I guess it's at the sharp end of halal requirements around slaughter and meat. But effectively, Muslim people want to eat halal food generally, not just meat, so it applies to all food products and then to other things that you put in or around your body, so pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, all of those things, even into Islamic banking. There's all sorts of different products or services that can have some sort of a halal or Islamic approval attached to them, and New Zealand could look further than just meat, I think. Yeah.
And what, Tony, I think you said, was it the Muslim population of the world was something like 1.5, 1.6 billion? And
is expected over the next few decades to go to about 2.2 billion. And you're right to point out, New Zealand, I think, has about 40,000 Muslims at the moment, and reliably informed that includes Sonny Bill Williams, but they're expected to increase to about 100,000 just over. And so we're always going to have to look beyond New Zealand, just as we do for our products in general, because our population here is not big enough to consume what we produce. And all we're really saying is here right on our doorstep is a growing, emerging population with growing economic wealth, some particular religious requirements on the way through, but who have equal interest in food integrity, food safety, food quality. And as a consequence, New Zealand's ideally placed to focus on them and make money.
You've been watching Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. Thanks to my guests, Dan Coup and Tony Egan, and as always, to you at home for watching. If you'd like to get in touch, see the Country 99 TV website for details. We do like hearing from you. I'm Karen McCarthy. Join us next time for more Straight Talk.